In Chapter 2 of Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff, he answers the very basic question, what is socialism? Defining socialism is a little trickier than it sounds. As we said in the intro and in Chapter 1, socialism is a response to capitalism, and as a response, it presumes it's trying to do better than capitalism. The same way capitalism was trying to do better than feudalism and the other systems that came before. Wolff lays out exactly what he means by doing better. By that, he means a system that allows for work that is more socially meaningful, that is less destructive to people's bodies and the environment, a system that is more secure in delivering adequate income for people's families. And the big one here, a system that allows people to pursue real participation in politics. What does that mean? That means having the education to knowingly participate, to know what you're doing and know what you're talking about, to have a job that allows the leisure time to actually learn and discuss politics and to make it a part of your life, to go to political meetings, to join a political party, to run for office, who knows? And a system that allows the civil freedoms to vote freely and express your ideas. So that's not a definition right there by itself, but that's part of a definition that describes what socialism is trying to do. Wolff lays out the overall goal too. Socialists want to be able to explore and develop their full potentials as individuals and members of society while contributing to its welfare and growth. And that's really interesting because pro-individualism and pro-growth are usually right-wing ideals. But under socialism, because we're taking care of people, they're able to pursue passions. So maybe you're flipping burgers in the day, but at night you're composing a musical or writing a play or creating some fantastic art or organizing or building something or volunteering. Socialism allows for people to have their basic needs met so they can fulfill their potential at other levels outside of just work. So now let's get into the nuts and bolts differences between socialism and capitalism. First off, they're both economic systems. That means, how are the things made and how do they get to the people? Capitalism divides participants in production and distribution into employers and employees. Employers direct and control employees' work with regard to the production and distribution of goods and services. In socialism, the whole community of people served by, living in, or living with the economy participate democratically in producing and distributing those goods and services. According to Wolff, these differences in economies center around something called labor power, a person's ability to work over a specific period of time. Labor power is paid for with products or money called a wage. Now, clearly in our lived experiences, we know economic systems aren't all or nothing. Walmart is obviously very capitalist, but the co-op grocery store down the street is a little more socialist. And this happens at the international level as well, of course. China and the USSR do business with all sorts of countries who aren't strictly socialist or communist. The reason they can all coexist is because even though the means of production are a little bit different, they all share the same distribution system, which is called market exchange. Things still are worth what they're worth, especially outside of your country. If you say milk is worth this much and another country's like, nah, I can just get it cheaper, they're just gonna get it cheaper. So that kind of sums up the dictionary on paper definition of socialism. So what have we learned here? That it's a response to capitalism, that it wants people to be happier and more fulfilled and struggling less, or some combination of things like that. And that it wants to reimagine a democratic workplace that replaces the employer-employee dynamic. Beyond that, it's a shit show. There's two prominent ways to think about socialism today: as a government intervention to benefit workers, or as a reorganization of workplaces to benefit workers. They both benefit workers, though. That's kind of the key part. Let's start with government intervention, because that's what most people think about anyways when they hear socialism. To Wolff, when we think about socialism as just government intervention, the main thing we have to ask is, what is the government doing and how much of it are they doing? In capitalism, ideally, the government would be doing nothing, not intervening at all, not involved anywhere. People who believe this are usually libertarians today, and they think that any intervention at all by the government compromises capitalism, and somehow the invisible hand of the market will get mad, even though people vote on things which is the market. The market is. But through this understanding of socialism, the level of state intervention itself defines the degree of socialism. More government is more socialism. That idea that anything the government does is socialism usually leads to most people believing that we live in a mixed system. A mix of capitalism on one hand and a little socialism on the other. But the main point is through this system, no one ever agrees on when something officially is socialist or isn't. Even in the USSR, Lenin said that we are not socialist, we're state capitalist. And then a year later, Stalin came and said, no, we're socialist. We're not changing anything, it's the same thing, but now we're socialist. And it turns out the USSR actually leads to a core disagreement about socialism. That is, should the government just regulate industries, or should they actually have ownership of parts of industries? State ownership, like in the USSR, meant the state could have active ownership of major industries. This form of socialism that went past taxation and regulation became known as communism. On the other hand, regulation-focused socialists celebrated private market capitalism, where the state taxed, spent, regulated, and distributed income and wealth more equally, but did not own and operate enterprises. In contrast to the USSR, these socialists, who maintained the name socialists, really stress a commitment to political freedoms and civil liberties. And then the Great Depression happened. With the Depression came the introduction of Keynesian Economics, named after John Maynard Keynes. Now, in Keynesian Economics, he basically suggests empowering state authorities like the central bank or treasurers to intervene in the economy to help stave off the ebbs and flows, the depressions, the booms and busts that hurt people so much. But his reasoning was really interesting. Although those policies do help regular people from suffering depressions, although it's not working that great right now, the real reason he did them was to save capitalism itself. Keynes was not a friend to socialists. In fact, his biggest fear was that capitalism was going to anger the working class so much that they would rise up and basically would have a French Revolution 2.0 here. And he essentially cemented the argument that capitalism will destroy itself. And ironically, although capitalism came alongside with the American and French revolutions, democracy itself is naturally opposed by capitalists. That's because capitalists realize that if employees recognize that their votes can empower a state apparatus to end their suffering in one way or another, they'll do it. All they got to do is get mad enough. And so when capitalist structures continuously step on people or continuously cause these bust cycles where people lose everything, eventually they're going to flip out. What Keynesian economics does is suggest ways to not have so big of boom and bust cycles, to just slowly make more money so that the people stay nice and chill. And you know what? This brings up a core conundrum for capitalism. Capitalism needs the very structures it opposes. For coordination, for external and internal security, you got to have shipping lanes open, which are secured by a navy, and then also managing externalities and the business cycle and the legal system and mail and roads so they can ship things. All these things are absolutely necessary for businesses, but they're also paid for by the taxes that the businesses themselves lobby to lower. It's cannibalistic, it's fucked up, it's wild. And this brings up the second form of socialism, the more modern one. In this version, the role of the state is not as important as how the workplace itself is organized. That is, how humans collaborate at work. Traditional socialist systems like the USSR had just replaced employers with state apparatus. So you still maintain the employer-employee dynamic. But the new form of socialism wants to end that dynamic completely. To socialists, capitalist workplaces themselves are undemocratic, and in a socialist system, the workplaces should be democratic. According to Wolff, these would be new systems where, quote, every employee now has one constituent voice, equal to all other employees, in deciding what the workplace produces, what technology it uses, where production occurs, and what is done with the net revenues or surplus generated. This new system would represent a fundamental break from the slave, feudal, and capitalist system workplace class dynamics. The USSR and other early socialist attempts failed to do this because they only made the big macro changes, and they failed to make the micro level changes needed to succeed. The USSR was pretending to have changed workplace dynamics, but really had only done government intervention while stifling a lot of freedoms, particularly dissent, which is what allows a channel like this and so many others to exist in the first place. But it's important to note that these incomplete transitions are super normal. Like, think about slavery and the transition after that, from sharecropping or Jim Crow or indentured servitude or any number of those. They're all incomplete transitions away from a shittier system into something maybe less shitty. Wolff assumes that the transition away from capitalism will probably be a lot like this. It will involve different attempts, and we'll learn different things, and we'll have successes and failures along the way. Just like with capitalism, which, remember, codified slavery. To Professor Wolff, modern socialism should be understood as a mix of old traditions with the newer understanding of reorganizing the workplace to be more democratic. But also notes that it's always evolving, just like capitalism is, so there is no static definition. But I'm going to try to give you one anyways. So what is socialism? Well, there's not a very clear definition. That's why he took thousands of words to write it out across a very long chapter. But to me, socialism is something better than capitalism that democratizes the workplace and provides for the general welfare of all people so that we can reach our individual greatest potentials without being held back by hunger or cold or crime or financial need or poor education or addiction or poverty or unemployment or medical bills or any of the bullshit that gets in the way of people living their lives. So that's how Professor Wolff sums up socialism. It's a lot. It's not that easy. It's not just socialism is a system where everyone shares everything. I mean, that would be great if that's the case, but the reality is that the world is really complicated. And the reality is that we have to actually make systemic, structural, tangible changes to actually change an economic system. I think the big takeaway here is the reorganization of the workplace. To me, that's super interesting because it doesn't imply that everyone gets paid the same, and I think that's super important. It means that the employees themselves can decide how to run their business instead of being told how to run it by someone who may or may not be making decisions with their employees' best interests at heart. So if you have a super genius that's leading the company, the employees could still recognize their importance and make sure that they're still prominent in being paid adequately for their work. It also means that they can vote that one job's worth more than another, or that some people are part-time. It doesn't mean it's definitely going to be perfect, but it means there's an opportunity for people's voices to be heard while at work, the same way their voices can be heard in the public, in government, and in politics. We don't allow kings to run our country. In socialism, we don't allow kings to run our jobs. Although I really like almost all my bosses I've ever worked for, to be honest. But that's besides the point. Let me know what you think in the comments below. What else is important to know about socialism? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep doing more videos like this. Thank you, and we will see you next time on Run It Back.